Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore our relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, A.C. Stauble
and Isaac Hill.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Plant Cunning Podcast. Today we have returning guest Mychal A. Bryan, who is an astrologer, writer, educator. We're very excited to have him on the show. He's going to talk about his new book on medical astrology, and this is always a fun conversation. We love medical astrology here at the Plant Cunning Podcast. And before we get into it, I would just like to put a couple plugs. The first is that I'm doing a Dog Days deal for Vedic astrology readings. This is good until August 13th, 2025. You don't have to schedule your reading for that time period. You just have to schedule a reading during that time period. It can be in the future. But it's $80 for 60 minutes. So get at me. You can email me at info@plantcunning.com, info@plantcunning.com, or just plantcunning@gmail.com to schedule a reading with me. Also, AC is starting a new herb school. There are still some camping spots available at the herb retreat, which is starting August 13th. That's August 13th through 16th, I believe. And you can sign up for that at actea.org. You can also sign up for the full year of classes at the Actea Institute at actea.org. Also, thanks to everybody who comments, subscribes, shares, likes, and especially signs up for our Patreon. It's basically just a tip jar, but we really appreciate all of our lovely patrons. Thank you. It really helps keep this going. You know, we've got to pay for like the software to edit and all that kind of stuff. So it's really helpful. And thanks to everybody who listens and appreciates, gives us good reviews, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Okay. We are happy to have Mychal A. Bryan back on the show. Mychal is a well-known astrologer, yoga instructor, writer, teacher, and also a dancer. Teaching dancing right now in New York City. That's awesome. So you've just written your third book, which is on medical astrology, and this is your third book in 3 years.
Yeah, it's my third book in 3 years. It is.
And it's not just like a little tiny 150-page book. It's a 700-page
monster.
Okay. So what prompted you to write this book? Why this book? Why medical astrology?
So first of all, thanks for having me back on the show. I really enjoy being here, and I really enjoy seeing the work that you all have done over the last few years since I was here the last time. And in terms of this book, what I'm basically doing is I'm writing out the entire syllabus for my 2-year professional astrologer's diploma program that I offer at my school, Oraculo School of Astrology. And so the first book, Mastering Traditional Astrology, or the Red Book, is the first 2 months of that program. And then the purple book, Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, is the next 2 months of the first semester. So within those two books, that's the first semester of the program. And the green book, which is the medical astrology book, the New Western Medical Astrology, is basically, it's a bit of a hybrid because it contains basically the entire medical astrology syllabus that we offer at Oraculos, but it also contains a very heavy chunk of just natal astrology as well. And that's the second semester at Oraculos. So I'm kind of trying to put on paper everything that I teach within the 2-year program. And in our classes, we have things called working documents. So whereas if you're having a class in person, somebody might write on a chalkboard. In our classes, we have a shared Google Doc, and that's our working document. And so I've been typing out working documents for these classes and courses for basically the last 6 years. And so being able to come up with a 700-page book every year has been I mean, it's always a challenge, but it's also very easy because I've been typing out the chapters of these books for once again the last 6 years. So when it comes to actually writing the book, it's a matter of seeing what I've already typed, compiling it, editing it, scrapping things, starting things from scratch and all of that stuff so that I could come out with the book. And I think it was Chris Brennan who told me, I can't remember when he told me this. He told me this before I came out with my first book. One, he convinced me to self-publish, which was a big deal because at the time there were a lot of publishers within the astrological community who were trying to get their hands on my intellectual property. And he convinced me to self-publish my book because he had self-published his book, the Hellenistic Astrology book. And he also said to me that if I wanted to sell the book, I should get it done by time as the next big conference. And so at that time, the next big conference would have been the NORWAC conference in Seattle in I think probably 2023. And so I made sure to get the book published by NORWAC. And because I'm a very Saturnian person, in my mind, I said, okay, NORWAC happens once a year, which means I need to write a book once a year. And so
So you have a book for Norwalk every year.
exactly. And so
Oh
for
my
the
goodness.
and so it's so ridiculous. And I hate that I'm this way and I hate that I put that pressure on myself. But basically, for the last 3 years, I've had a book published by the first week of May of every year for the last 3 years so that I could sell it at Norwalk in the last week of May every year for the last 3 years. So next year, I don't think I'm going to Norwalk and I'm giving myself a break. However, next year is UAC, the United Astrology Conference, which is an even bigger conference. So I may not have a book published by May next year, but I do plan to have one published by September for UAC.
Oh wow, awesome.
Okay, and what's that one going to be on?
So that one, once again, I'm doing it in sequence. So that one is going to be the full natal astrology syllabus, whereas
Okay.
the medical astrology book was just the medical astrology portion of our natal astrology class. The next book is going to be the full natal astrology syllabus. So your money and your family and your children and your marriage and your spouse's money and your higher education and all the other stuff in natal astrology is going to be in the fourth book.
Okay, cool. Cool, cool.
Well done.
Yeah.
You've
Congratulations.
done it.
Yeah, I mean that is a lot. That's a lot of writing.
Yeah.
But again, as you're saying, like you've been working on it for years, so
Kind of compiling what you've
yeah.
already done, which
Hmm.
is possible.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But I know what it's like to be working on a book too. It can be a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot of
So
mental strain.
congratulations. I saw I want to say there's two. I saw the first one that was published on the Golden
Oh,
Untrue.
Heathen Golden Dawn. Yeah, yeah, that was last year. I'm working on another book now that should be out soon, but I don't want to talk about it too much. But I'm excited for it. But that's what I'm doing every day this week. I'm just like working on it. So I'm just like.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, so one question for you because I wanted to ask you this. The
Mm.
Heat of Golden Dawn, is that based also is that a crossover between the Golden Dawn, the magic of the Golden Dawn, and Norse paganism?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's using the Norse symbolism, the day working with the Norse deities, using the runes with the sort of techniques from the Golden Dawn. So you're doing a lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram and invoking Thor and in the in different deities in those quarters and so on. And it comes from like John Michael Greer wrote a Celtic Golden Dawn using
Hmm.
Celtic deities and so on. So this was using that as a model, as a template. And I kind of worked with him a little bit in doing it too. It was actually a project he and somebody else started that I continued. I was like, aren't you guys going to finish this? And they're like, well, why don't you do it? So I did it,
So,
Yeah.
so I asked because when I was younger, I think when I was a teenager, I dedicated my life to Odin.
Mm.
I made my first set of runes. This was my first year in university. I made my first set of runes. I bled on them. I did the whole 9 yards. I was very, 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 very much a devotee of Odin when I was like 15, probably between 13 and 16. And in a lot of ways, I still am because once a devotee, always a devotee. And so I was very interested when I saw the cover of your book because I think there are runes on the cover, and then I saw the
Yeah.
golden one, and I say that as well. So anyway, I have to get a copy. basically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we'll
So we'll
we'll
send you
switch.
one.
I'll send you one. You send me one of these. It's a little smaller than 700 pages though, but the
Awesome.
rituals are dense. It's a lot. It's a pretty dense book.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the medical astrology book. Medical astrology is something I've always been interested in too. I mean, we had Judith Hill on, I think maybe 4 years ago now, and she was sort of my first introduction into medical astrology and reading all of her books. And I think also when I got into it, like I had been mainly studying ticket tricks and like magical elections and this kind of stuff, that aspect of astrology and horary as well, with Christopher Warnock. And when I got into the medical astrology, I like was learning all this stuff, but I also realized I didn't have the basis of the natal astrology. There's
Mhm.
like you kind of need that before the medical astrology. There's a lot of natal astrology you need to know in order
Mhm.
you don't need to know about career and all that kind of stuff. But from your perspective, how well, in how you structure the book, what is the best way to learn medical astrology? How do you go about actually, 'cause it's a very complicated thing that has a lot of prerequisites.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about how I sequenced the books and what came out when. And so the first semester, I'm going to reference the course that I teach just because I have built the course to be able to get a person to practice medical astrology in as stress-free a manner as possible, but in as short a time span as possible. And so, how I've sequenced our courses at Oraculos is that the first semester, which is I think 14 weeks, maybe 12 weeks or something, I think it's 12 to 14 weeks, is called The Foundations of Classical Astrology. And so, my first book, which is 647 pages, Mastering Traditional Astrology, is meant to teach you everything you could possibly need to know about the introduction to astrology because a lot of people start studying astrology from a lot of different places. Some people start from electional, some people start from horary, some people start from, I don't know anybody who starts from mundane, but people start from all of these different parts of astrology. But classically, there was a pre-astrology that you learned even before learning how to read a chart because there's so much you need to know. You need to know how fast the planets move. You need to know what does retrogradation mean. You need to know what is declination? You need to know antitia, contra antitia. You need to know about planetary strengths, what makes a planet intrinsically strong, what makes a planet circumstantially strong. There are all of these things that we just need to know as foundations of classical astrology. Even before we start looking at our first chart for the purposes of electional, for the purposes of horary, for the purposes of natal, for the purposes of mundane. So I teach my students that within their first 2 months with me. And then after that, we go into horary astrology. And the reason for that is because horary astrology is the astrology of answering questions. After you learn the divinational answering of questions, every other astrology that you will ever learn is based on answering questions. When someone comes to you with their birth chart, the birth chart is a chart full of questions. The first house answers the question, who am I in this lifetime? The second house answers the question, will I be rich in this lifetime? Will I be poor in this lifetime? The third house answers the question, what's the relationship between my siblings going to be? The fourth house answers the question, what's the relationship with my family and my father going to be? The fifth house answers the question, will I have children? And so as we go throughout our natal chart is a natural extension or rather, natal astrology is a natural extension of horary astrology, which is why I teach horary astrology to my students first, because our brain as astrologers needs to be primed to answer people's questions. And
Mhm.
horary astrology teaches you how to answer the everyday questions. Is this person my soulmate? Should I take this job? Should I go on this trip? All of the should I's in the everyday, the day-to-day, the minor arcana questions, horary astrology teaches us how to answer them. So that after you've already wet your bones doing that sort of mundane question answering, then you're ready for the big questions. Will I ever? Will I ever have kids? Will I ever get married? Will I ever have a house? Those questions that are built into our natal horoscope, basically. So that's what I do. I teach foundations of classical astrology, horary astrology, and then natal astrology. Now, to the
I like that.
question, thank you. I mean, I like it too. Now, so I'll say one thing about the medical astrology and just where that fits in. Medical astrology has always been the beginning of natal astrology because there is no will I be rich if you're going to die by the time you're 5 years old. There,
Yeah.
there is no will I be married if you're going to be bedridden for the rest of your life. There is no will I have success in my career if your body doesn't work. So within a traditional astrological perspective, medical astrology was the entry point into reading the birth chart. Today, within the 21st century, we live in an age of certification. So people like to get certified in things, and
Right, right.
by extension of that, people like to offer certification courses where you split up the pie into 1,000 pieces when in fact it's really one pie. So today we have people saying that they're medical astrologers, but they're not natal astrologers, which has never existed in 2,000 years of astrology because medical astrology is the entry point to practicing all natal astrology. And so I teach medical astrology kind of first because that's a first house question. Will I be healthy? Is my body okay? What do I need to look out for in my physical body? And then we can talk about your money. And then we can talk about your siblings. And then we can go around the chart, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so what is medical astrology? What do you teach people? What are you able to see and how?
Medical astrology, according to Dr. William Davidson, who was a medical astrologer practicing in the 1950s, medical astrology is the study of the human body and the astrological forces that sustain it. And so, in a nutshell, that's what we're doing. We're studying the human body from the perspective of the birth chart, because the birth chart is a blueprint of every concrete experience that's ever going to happen in our lives. And there's nothing more concrete than you're going to have endometriosis, or you're not. Or you're going to have asthma, or you're not. Or you're going to have some chronic digestive problem, or you're not. These are concrete realities of our lives. In the 21st century, we're used to practicing astrology that has no concrete basis. We're used to practicing astrology to talk about your past life, or to talk about your future life, or to talk about everything else other than the things going on with you right now. And traditionally speaking, astrology has always been about describing the concrete realities of our lives and how those realities impact the person who we are. And so medical astrology is a study of this physical vehicle of our human body that is meant to carry our soul forward so that we can fulfill our great work within this lifetime. And unless we can understand this physical body, we really can't understand anything else about our destiny. And so within the medical astrology reading, we're using that reading as a means to see what are your basic strengths and weaknesses on a physical level. And also on a mental level, because our mental state is a clear extension of our physical well-being. So medical astrology is a study of what our basic constitution is, just how we're coming into the world. What are we born with? What are our constitutional strengths? What are our constitutional weaknesses? And then after that, we go into studying what are the planetary combinations within our chart that are inherently morbificant. That word morbificant is a word that comes, I think, out of the 17th century, where you would cast a chart to see what is the semen morbificus, or the seed of malevolence that causes somebody to be sick. So you would cast a chart to see what is the seed of malevolence within this person's life that causes them to be sick. But there are a bunch of them. There's like a bajillion of these seeds of malevolence all throughout our natal charts. So when we do a medical astrology reading, we're specifically looking after we do your basic constitutional assessment, then we go into specifically pinpointing what are the planetary combinations within this person's birth chart that specifically point in the direction of illness. And what are those illnesses most likely to be? And so for me, what I teach my students is how to identify, even if you're not going to pinpoint and say, this is going to manifest as polycystic ovarian syndrome, even if you're not going to get that specific, you should still be able to say, this combination naturally points towards an illness within the female reproductive system, or this combination naturally points towards an illness of the thyroid, or this combination naturally points towards migraines, or this combination naturally points towards some upper respiratory tract infection. Or you should at the very minimum be able to point towards the system of the body that's going to be most impacted by this planetary combination. And then as you get better and as you read 1,000 charts or more, then you begin to be able to say, okay, I've seen this 100 times in the charts of people who have GERD, or I've seen this 100 times in the charts of people who have diverticulitis, or I've seen this X amount of times. Then you begin to be able to pinpoint and say what the specific issue is that a planetary combination might yield.
Right. And then sometimes there can be multiple planetary combinations that show, like, for complicated things. Like, I just did a research project on Tourette syndrome, and there are like a few very interesting things that almost everybody had, but it was like, a lot of other things, like, because there's only so many planetary combinations as well, and you kind of have to, where many of them overlap, then you can see. But that is also a problem too, like with when you're looking at planetary combinations. How do you know, like, what of all of the different potential meanings they are meaning too? Because are you doing it more, this person is coming with a problem, they have endometriosis, can I see it? Or is it you're looking at the chart and saying, I wonder what problems this person has?
Yeah, so from a very young age, I've always been blown away by the magical ability to say something before knowing it.
Hmm.
So no one who books a medical astrology reading with me tells me what their issues are before the reading.
Okay.
Because, and that's also how I teach. I don't enjoy, personally, I don't enjoy when I went to a lecture at a conference once, and the lady was supposed to be giving a blind chart reading, which are kind of like the readings that I give, where somebody brings in their chart and they just read it on the spot. But instead, she interviewed the recipient. She interviewed the client for like 15 minutes, and she found out all of this lady's life details. And then after that, she proceeded to give the reading and say back to the lady the exact same information that the lady told her. Which for
Oh
me,
no.
for me, it's like, what the fuck? Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, it's so boring. It's so boring. And I'm not a fan of that style of astrology, because if we're astrologers, we have to, at some level, acknowledge that we are seers. And insofar as we're seers, we should be able to say before knowing. And so when somebody comes to me with their chart, I look at the chart and I have devised a system that allows me to pinpoint the combinations that are going to be most morbificant, if we're going to use that word, morbificant within that person's life, how they're most likely to manifest 90% of the times, and where that's going to show up within that person's body. So back to your question we only have a limited amount of planetary combinations. If we're including Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, there are exactly 78 potential planetary combinations. I remember that number because there's also 78 cards in the tarot deck.
Yeah.
So if we're including Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, there are exactly 78 planetary combinations within the chart. But those planetary combinations can also be planets in particular signs of the zodiac, and the signs of the zodiac also add another layer of meaning. So on the one level, on the one hand, Venus Saturn can manifest as a number of things. Venus Saturn can manifest as dry skin. Venus Saturn can manifest as dry hair. Venus Saturn can manifest as dry nails. Venus Saturn can manifest as hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism causes dry skin, dry hair, dry nails. Venus Saturn can manifest as all of these things, period. However, when Venus is in, for example, Cancer and squared by Saturn, Cancer corresponds with the stomach, specifically within the human body. So Venus in Cancer squared by Saturn still carries the meaning of Venus Saturn. Venus Saturn, dry skin, dry hair, dry nails, hypothyroidism. That always will be Venus Saturn. You need to drink more water if you have Venus Saturn, because you have a tendency towards dehydration. Venus Saturn, because Venus is one of the planets within the birth chart that signifies the moisture content of the body, like the moon. So moon Saturn people need to drink more water, but Venus Saturn people also need to drink more water. All of these are true. So whenever we're assessing a planetary combination, on the one hand, we're assessing that combination based on the planets in question, Venus, Saturn. But after we're done that level of assessment, now we have to assess the fact that Venus is in a particular sign of the zodiac. and afflicted by that Saturn. So now we go to a second layer of interpretation, which is now Venus is in Cancer squared by Saturn. What does Cancer correspond with? The stomach. What does Saturn correspond with? Obstruction. So if somebody has Venus in Cancer squared by Saturn, now we have a combination for constipation. Now we have a constipation for a slow, sluggish digestive system. Now we have a combination for a cold gut, basically, and all of the things that come out as a result of that. So yes, there are only 78 planetary combinations, but within that, when we put all of those planets through the 12 signs of the zodiac, we now get a much vaster variety of things that could possibly be the case. And ultimately, at the end of the day, there aren't that many things that can happen to the human body. You know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
we like to think that we are infinitely capable of getting sick in an infinite amount of ways, but we can't. You know, there are only 12 systems in the human body. If you separate the female and male reproductive system, there are only 12 systems of the human body. So, you know, if you throw a rock in a petri dish, there's only so much shaking up that could possibly happen. So even though a disease might manifest with many different names, at the end of the day, there are only so many ways that the body can get sick. And we have enough planets in astrology to describe all the ways that the body could potentially malfunction.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, how much wiggle room do you see in the person's ability to heal if they have some planetary combinations, like a Venus Saturn? You said drink more water. So, how do you approach that when you're telling someone about these planetary afflictions as an astrologer and what they can do about it?
That's a great question because whenever I'm writing a book, I don't give readings because it's very difficult to do that and write a book and then run a school and then do all the other stuff. But I recently started giving readings again, and I met with a client last night. And I I have these like phrases that I use in every reading, which kind of are meant to like be disclaimers and
Yeah,
protect myself basically.
right.
So I said to the client, and I always say this to every single client I have, hey, I'm about to say something that seems difficult to me from my astrological perspective. However, I want you to know that the client last night was born in 1970 something. And so I said to her, I said, I want you to know that everything I'm saying to you, I'm saying it retrospectively. So there's nothing that I'm projecting onto your future because I hold the philosophy that everything that we're ever going to experience that is held within our birth chart, we're going to experience it by the age of 30 at the minimum, the age of 35 at the maximum. So if you're 30 years or older, you've already experienced every single joy or sorrow that your birth chart has to hold. And
Wow.
unfortunately for me, I don't know if that's fortunate, but at this point in my life, the majority of my clients are over the age of 30. So I have the pleasure of saying to them, everything that I'm going to potentially say to you about your birth chart is something that has already happened in your life and something that's safely planted in your past. So
Wow.
if I'm looking at your chart and saying fertility problems, like I did for the lady last night, if I'm looking at your chart and saying fertility problems, please know that that's something that I'm speaking about retrospectively and I'm not projecting that onto your future, which is nice because as astrologers, we hold this prophetic role in people's lives. And I would rather if I if I get something wrong because it quote unquote hasn't happened yet, I'd rather you feel like, wow, he was just wrong because that's never happened in my life, as opposed to you leave your reading with me feeling as if I'm projecting something onto your future. Now, I know that this isn't necessarily 1,000% the truth because there are some people who there are many markers for a hysterectomy in the chart, for example. And there are some people who at 35 years old say, well, hey, I haven't had a hysterectomy yet. And then they come back to me a month later and say, hey, Mychal, you remember when you asked me if I had a hysterectomy and I said no? And then whatever. Well, I just went to my doctor and my doctor said that I have precancerous cells that are showing up in my uterus, and he's suggesting that I have a hysterectomy as a result or as a means of circumventing cancer later on.
Wow.
So I know that there is a high possibility of even after you're 35 years old, there are still things that can crop up. But I don't like to stress people out. So
Mhm.
I
Sure.
like to say, hey, if you're 35 and what I'm saying doesn't land for you, then don't expect it to happen in the future. I know that that is 70% true, but I also know that there are cases in which people don't encounter certain things in their birth chart until they're 40.
Mhm.
And I just don't like to say that out loud because I like to let people have hope.
Yes.
Sure. But then also, how do you work with the birth chart to have a better possible outcome too? Like,
Right. That's
because
the next question.
like the remediation question.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful, that's a wonderful question. And the reality is that I exist in highly medical spaces. I work in a human dissection lab. I spend a great deal of my time every single month cutting bodies open, cleaning fat, eviscerating organs, taking out the stomach, emptying the contents, cleaning it up. Like I spend a lot of my time in the human body, more time than most people, I guess. Far
Hmm.
more time than most people in general, and far more time than anybody else who I know who practices medical astrology at this moment or who teaches medical astrology at this moment. And even within that, I'm well aware of the scope of my practice. And scope of practice is something that's very important, and it's something that we don't really understand as astrologers, because scope of practice means you know how much you can do, and
Yeah.
you know when you start to go beyond that limit. So my limit is I cut bodies open regularly, but I'm not a medical doctor. And
Yeah.
so I have no right even telling you should drink more water, truthfully, because I had a client once who she was allergic to water, and
What?
when the water went into her throat, she was allergic to drinking water. She had to receive hydration through an IV drip. She couldn't actually drink water the because the inner lining of her throat the epithelium, there was something wrong with the cells on the inner lining of her throat, and water was basically corrosive. It was like drinking acid. So she has to get an IV drip to stay hydrated. So as a medical astrologer, you're not even legally allowed to tell somebody that they should drink water. And we get ahead of ourselves when we go to conferences and we see this person who's a naturopathic doctor telling people, oh, you should take this magnesium. And then we think that we can go out and tell people that they should take magnesium when magnesium poisoning is a very real thing. And so I very, very clear about what the scope of my practice is. I'm an astrologer who is heavily medical adjacent, but I'm not a doctor. And as out of an acknowledgement of that, I can refer you to a
Mhm.
doctor. I can refer you to an acupuncturist. I can
Mhm.
refer you to an herbalist. AC, I just sent somebody to you the other day.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Whenever people say, hey, do you know an herbalist? I say, hey, check out AC
Oh,
from
thank you.
and so, but I can refer you to an acupuncturist, I can refer you to an herbalist, I can refer you to a traditional Chinese medical doctor, I can refer you to an Ayurvedic practitioner, I can refer you to all of these people. I could refer you to your own primary care provider. But what I cannot do and what I will never do is tell you you need to take an iron pill, you need to take iron supplements, because taking too much iron causes your hair to drop out. I cannot tell you you need to take more vitamin A because too much vitamin A is poisonous. I cannot tell you you need to take this ashwagandha because I don't even know what ashwagandha is or does. I can't tell you to put anything in your body, on your body, anything at all, and I never will. So this question of remediation, which has come up quite frequently within the astrological community, is a very dangerous question because the people who I find who are on the forefront. Now, there are different types of remediation. There's magical remediation where somebody says, hey, wear this ruby. Fine, wear all the gems you want, wear all the crystals you want, pray to Ganesh as many times as you want. Do all of the things that doesn't infringe on a person's medical autonomy. But the minute you start to tell that person, grind this ruby up and put it in your morning, you've crossed into you crossed a boundary
Yeah.
that is not within the scope of your practice as an astrologer. So I think it's super important that we teach astrologers. And this is a question that comes up all the time. And unfortunately, many of my colleagues, the way how they speak when they're at conferences, it sets people up for failure. I just was at a conference recently and I heard a colleague of mine telling people, just going through just a list of pills basically, and saying, hey, you could take this vitamin for this thing and you could take this other vitamin for this thing and you can mix these two things together and get this result, and then you could take this herbal tincture, and but this herbal tincture works well with this tablet, and just going through all of these pills and supplements. And I'm like, dude, like, how can you not see that your whole presentation is a red flag? Because nobody in this audience has the background that you have. Nobody in this audience has the training that you have. You can't go to an astrological conference and tell people what vitamins and supplements they should be taking, because they're then going to go out and tell their clients to take those vitamins and supplements, and they haven't done the 6 years of training that you've done. They don't know how to do an allergy test in the way that you know how to do an allergy test. They don't know anything. So, to your question about remediation, I don't know anything about remediation. That's not my job as an astrologer. That's not my job as a human being who has no medical licensing. And I stay as far away from that topic as I possibly can. And the closest I come to remediation is telling somebody, you should go and see your nearest Ayurvedic practitioner and tell them that your astrologer said that you have a cold gut. Because if you tell your Ayurvedic practitioner that your astrologer says you have a cold gut, he or she will know exactly what to do for you for that problem.
Okay. Yeah. So don't do, and this is one of the reasons I've been studying in the Vedic lineages the Vedic lineage that I've been studying in, is to learn, remediation from that source. And it mostly is prayers, ritual, gemstones, that kind of thing. Even gemstones are a little, the little Tomasic. You can make some things go wrong if you don't know what each of those planets are doing. If that planet is doing something in a divisional chart that you don't want to activate, you shouldn't even use that gemstone. But the prayers and the rituals and donation, those are like the main remediation techniques.
Mm-hmm.
But it does, unless you have the training in herbalism, Ayurveda, TCM, you shouldn't be giving remedies. And even in the US, like, you have to be able to prescribe anything, you have to have some pretty serious training.
I like your approach though of, just staying in your lane. And also I think about like how you say, the chart best before you're 30 and you're not like projecting anything. It makes me think about how sometimes when people think that they've been cursed, it's as bad as being cursed. And so sometimes if we, even as herbalists or astrologers, if we, say something that could manifest in that person, we just have to be really careful,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good approach.
One of the things I think about, and I think that's such a great point, AC, one of the things that comes up often is there are certain markers for diabetes within a birth chart. I have banned my students from ever saying the word diabetes, because it's such a pervasive condition. And it's something, I guess, probably because of my own experience, I'm afraid of diabetes because I come from a country that's heavily diabetic, because the Bahamas, I think, is like the third most unhealthiest country in the world or something like that. And so instead of saying diabetes, we say sugar-related health problems. Because when you say sugar-related health problem, it carries less weight than saying,
Absolutely.
than saying the D word, than saying
Yes.
and so I think that there's a lot of training that I do with my students that has to do with how to present information in a way that isn't jarring to a person's equilibrium.
Yeah.
And like saying sugar-related health problems instead of diabetes is one of the ways that we do that. saying things to the effect of, have either of your parents experienced this issue before? Knowing well in my mind, I don't think your mom experienced this. I think you're experiencing this. However, if I say to a woman who I see,
Wow, that's good.
yeah, if I say to a woman who I see as a particular combination for miscarriages. There are traditional combinations for miscarriages, for example, and there are combinations for heavy bleeding during menstruation. There are combinations for everything basically. And I say, hey, has have the women within your immediate family, has your mom, for example, experienced X, Y, Z? And she says no, but I've experienced that.
Yeah.
I give her the permission to hold that within herself, even though in my mind I already know I thought that she had the problem. If
Yeah.
I say it before she says it, it makes her feel as if, wow, I'm really sitting in a moment that's a magical moment, but I'm offering the information to him. I don't feel as if he's throwing that on me, you know?
Love that so much.
Yeah, there are all these tech, like the skills of actually talking with the client is a whole other set of skills that have to be developed. I've had to learn. I'm learning. I'm learning astrology every day. But I'm learning that. That's definitely a growing edge. But
Mhm.
especially like because as you say in the introduction, astrology is not an easy thing. It's a very difficult science, art that takes years of study to actually do well. And a
Mhm.
lot of the people, like when you're in the mode of study and of analysis, it's kind of like more that like, a little on the spectrum kind of. So the info, you have a tendency to like info dump rather than actually consult and relate with the person and say things in a way that, you're not just using technical lingo.
Mhm.
And that's something that I've had to work on for sure. But yeah, I like that. I like that
Yeah.
you're training your students to do that, and my teachers have helped with that too. But it's definitely a big thing.
Yeah.
Mhm. I think one of the things that happens, especially in the beginning of giving astrology readings, is that and this happens, so I have the opportunity to sit down and watch hundreds of astrologers go through our examination process on an annual basis. And so I've seen every shade of what could possibly happen in a client consultation because the exam of the Oraculos is that you have to give a reading to a person who you've never met before in front of all of your colleagues. So it's a performance, but it's also a very technical exam. And one of the problems that people have in the beginning of practicing astrology is they approach their reading as if they're giving a lesson.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem where you want to say everything you know and you want to use all the technical language and you want to, instead of saying to your client, you're a Saturnian person, and this can manifest as you being somebody who's very grounded and practical and logical, but at the same time, as a result of that, you tend to have a very heavy outlook on life, and that can cause you to experience depression. I was going to say suffer from depression, but I've banned my students from saying
Uh-huh.
suffer from because no one's suffering from anything. So
Uh-huh.
instead of saying suffering from, we say experience. And this causes you to experience depression, and this causes you to feel as if you aren't supported, and potentially you haven't been supported, and potentially you feel as if you've had to take care of yourself. And all of these things, which are true about Saturn, instead of doing that, they go the route of saying, you're a Saturnian person. Saturn is a cold and dry, melancholic planet. That's the furthest planet from the Earth. And in traditional astrology, Saturn is also associated with black bile. And black bile in the human body is associated with excrement, which can mean human waste, and it can also be sweat, and it can also be saliva. It
Right,
also
right,
result
right.
in
Too much.
Saturn is the god of bones. And all of this all of this shit that is of no relevance. And so when students give readings in the beginning, they want to make their clients, I don't even know if it's a conscious desire, but they want
Yeah.
for their clients to know that they know stuff. But the stuff that you know is of no relevance to that person's life. So
Uh-huh.
there's a difference there are two levels of astrology information. There's all of the meta information that you need to know to inform what you'll say in your micro reading, but the micro reading is the most important thing. And if you're telling me I'm a Saturnian person, I need to know how that applies to my life specifically.
Yeah.
I do not care that you know that Saturn is the domicile ruler, the daytime domicile, the insect domicile ruler for Capricorn, and the out of sense domicile ruler for. I do not care about your technical information because that has no relevance to my life. And so that's a big part of what I teach students as well. Just how to speak like a human being. I think that that's a big part of it. How do I give a reading where I'm speaking in plain English and nobody never needs to hear the word domicile ever?
Yeah.
Is a big part of my work.
For sure. Yeah, and it's
Cool.
it's really important. It's very important. It's as important as the technical information for giving readings.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about the physical health issues, and I'm wondering if you can speak to mental health issues as well. Like, what can you see in the chart, or maybe some examples of combinations that you see that can cause different mental health issues, ranging maybe from like depression, anxiety, or mania and bipolar disorder, things like that?
hmm That's a great question. I tend to be, I want to say, I tend to be a stick in the mud. And so as a result of that, when I'm a very practical, tangible, physical, I cut my finger, now it's bleeding sort of person. And so when I set out to write the book, initially, I set out to write about the 12 systems of the human body, none of which includes our mental health. It's like my brain, and then it's like my lungs, and then it's my digestive system, and then it's my skin, and then it's my book. So I set out to talk about the physicality, the physical
Yeah.
reality, physical body, and what can go wrong in the physical body. And then at some point it occurred to me, and I don't even think someone said it, but I think that I just maybe I was on Instagram and they have these counseling commercials that come on for that particular company. I think
Yep.
it's called Bet or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, we live in an age where this whole talk of mental health is such a huge topic. It's just as huge as I cut my finger is bleeding. It's a huge preoccupation of our present generation. This conversations about mental health and mental well-being. So that's why the chapter after the final physical body issue, which is the male reproductive system, the next chapter is on mental health within the book because I wanted to give space to talk about that as well. And
Mm.
what I do in that chapter is I show that there is no planetary combination for your depression or for your bipolar disorder or for your anything, because a lot of the things that happen to us, a lot of the afflictions that happen to us from a mental health perspective, they are global issues within our chart. So it's not just that there's one thing that's going to point towards that. Your whole chart points towards you being depressed. Your whole chart points towards you having anxiety. Your whole chart points towards these things. And also in the mental health chapter, in every chapter, I think I look at about 10 different charts for 10 different people because I have, 10 clients per chapter or something to that effect. And I show how if somebody has bipolar disorder, on the one hand, that can be for chemical reasons within their brain. However, very few people within our research who have presented with bipolar disorder haven't also had some major trauma within their family, or some major trauma within their early childhood development, or some major trauma within their teenage years. That is, I won't say that's caused that issue to arise, but that is living simultaneously within their story. There are very few people who have, within our studies, who have suicidal ideations, who haven't also had some major trauma, some major challenge within their early childhood environment. So within the mental health chapter, I present the people's stories. And I show how this lady was bullied all her life from she was a young child, and her father left when she was 7 years old, and her mother married an abusive man, and as a result of that, her and her mother are estranged. And then when she was 21 years old, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and with schizophrenia and with manic this and all of these things. But everybody's story within that chapter follows that same lens of major trauma, major issue, major challenge, major wound, psychological wound happens when I'm younger. And when I'm older, I get diagnosed with these mental health conditions. So that is how I have approached the topic of mental health within this book. And and it's everything, it's not just that your Mercury is squaring Saturn and therefore you're depressed. Sure, that's a depression signature. But it's not just that your sun is squaring Saturn or your this is doing that thing. It's oftentimes these other markers that point towards instability within the household.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting too, from like the Vedic perspective that I study. And I mean, we see things, there's a lot of, it's a different language, but like we use the moon and the fourth house for the mind and for early childhood, and they're intricately
Yeah.
connected. Like your mind, your mother, and your mental health are all connected.
Ah,
And so the moon is often shows where a lot of the mental health difficulties come from.
Mhm.
But
it's really interesting that it's not like an outright combination. So like maybe infertility would show up as an outright combination. It's more about circumstance in your life, and some other aspects of your chart can point to that.
Yeah. I
But
think,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Lacey.
it's just that global perspective, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that we find in astrology is that we like to say that you go to this thing for this issue. And for a lot of things in astrology, that's true. So like you were saying, Isaac, yes, sure, the moon for the mother, on one perspective, moon as mother works 85% of the times using the moon as a barometer for our relationship with our mother. And there are very specific combinations of the moon that represent very specific things with the mother. Moon Mars could be an aggressive mother who also was aggressed by the men within our lives. So Moon Mars is oftentimes a combination for domestic violence against women. When we see that Moon Saturn, my mother didn't have the ability to really take care of me the way I wanted her to. Moon Uranus, my mother didn't really want to be a mother. She was cut out for everything else in this lifetime except for being a mother. And so she didn't have the tools necessary to stand in my life as an actual mother should have. Moon Neptune, my mother may have been sick, and as a result, to me in this lifetime. Moon Pluto, my mother was manipulative, and as a result of that, she gaslighted me when she abused me, and she told me she never did it. So the moon, as the mother, can be used as far as the mother is concerned. However, when we're stepping away from that and we're talking about our mental well-being. Our mental well-being ties in our early childhood environment. It ties
yeah.
in our dad. It ties in our relationship with our siblings. It ties in our ability to have children or not and how that impacts our self-image. It ties in the sort of relationships that we enter. It ties in the sort of financial relationships we have with our spouse and what those financial relationships says about the two of us. It ties in our career. It ties in everything. So the mental health piece, it would be lovely for me to say, go to your Mercury or go to your this thing or go to your that thing. But what we've found is that it's usually the entirety of who you are that impacts and that speaks towards your mental well-being in this lifetime.
And I found that to be the truth with with a lot of things in the chart too. It's like you have to analyze the whole chart to see what's going on. It's usually a pretty complex situation.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So I'm also interested in with the relationship between horary and medical astrology, because this book is mostly about looking at the natal chart for the medical astrology, but also in traditional Western astrology, especially in the Renaissance. A lot of times the astrologer was just casting a horary or a decumbrature.
Mhm.
to diagnose, maybe because people didn't have their birth charts.
Oh yeah.
But for you, what's that relationship? Like, are you going to see, and also in the Vedic tradition too, it's like we're looking at the birth chart for the reading, but we also look at the prajna for when the person contacts us, because there's like a level of, like, the birth chart's like the karma you came into this life with, but the prajna is like what's karma bring up at this moment, like, and what has your free will, how's your free will changed it since then, you know?
Mhm.
So, but so for me, the prajna and the horary is always a kind of important part of it. But so for you, how do you utilize that in medical astrology and in your training?
Yeah, I don't use it at all. And in terms of the training process, once again, I think that students need to know how to answer questions because clients don't come to an astrologer without questions. If
Mhm.
somebody's going to pay the money it takes to get an astrology reading, they're going to come with questions, at least
Yeah.
in my practice. And so I teach horary astrology because horary astrology trains the brain to answer questions.
Yeah.
However, after the brain of my students has been trained in that question answering model, we drop the horary and we never touch it again. Because
Oh.
because for me, Horary is a means to an end. It's a wonderful means to an end. From a pedagogical perspective, it makes sense to teach Horary astrology first because Horary astrology is the astrology of questions, and students, astrologers, need to know how to answer questions. The astrologers who can't answer questions tend to be modern astrologers, which I have no issue with anybody's astrology or what they practice or anything. And I also have no issue saying that modern astrologers don't know how to answer questions because modern astrology is built in such a way whereas there's this model of, I'm going to talk about your big three, your sun, moon, and rising. And then after I talk about your big three, I'm going to talk about where your nodes are. And then after I talk about where your nodes are, I'm going to talk about how your chart is shaped. Does it look like a seesaw? Does it look like a kite? Does it look like a bucket? Does it look like spaghetti? I'm going to talk about what your chart looks like. And so modern astrology has this model of just going through one thing to the next thing to the next thing to the next thing. And by the time as they're done all of that, counting how many planets are in fire signs, how many planets are in water signs, by the time as you've done all of that, 2 hours has passed. And the client hasn't asked anything or said anything because the modern astrology model isn't built for consultation. It's built for monologue, basically.
Mhm.
Whereas in an actual working astrologer's practice, clients come with questions. Horary
Yeah.
astrology teaches you to answer questions. And as a result of that, it's a wonderful thing to learn horary and then natal astrology. But after that, I don't touch horary at all, not with a 10-foot pole, because traditionally speaking, even when we read books from the 16th century, they say this horary chart is secondary to the natal chart because your natal chart will always hold your natal promise and your destiny within this lifetime. And when you're looking at a chart that holds your entire destiny, anything that you can possibly do or ask will always be secondary to that. So for me, I don't do horary in medical astrology because if you have a medical problem and it's going to be a major part of your life story, the only chart that's going to show up in is your birth chart because that's the purpose of your birth chart. Different people feel differently about it, but this is my perspective on the relationship. This is my perspective on where do we go to look for the answers that are going to be most helpful. I also don't have all day to sit with someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that that's another part of things. I think that like I keep on talking about conferences because as you know, I've been to conferences for the last 3 years because I've been writing books for the last 3 years. But I go to conferences and I just sit down and I listen to these people talk about how they give readings and what they do for readings and how they do whatever. And I could just tell that those people don't actually have a client practice because if you have a client practice, you don't have time to do the consultation chart, then the horary chart, then the birth chart, then the solar return chart, then the prenatal eclipse chart. You don't have time to do all of that when you're meeting clients on a regular basis. So it's also a matter of how do I help the most people How do I find tools that are most efficient? And what do I know works 90% of the times? And for me, that's your birth chart because we only have an hour together and I don't have time to look at anything else personally.
Okay. Yeah, and for me the Horary chart is kind of like it's a small. I spent maybe 5 minutes on that. It's just giving me, and sometimes I don't even, if it's not matching up, I'm not utilizing it, but sometimes it can give some relevant information for
Mhm.
to add some detail to the birth chart, like where things are moving. My other question is about timing techniques for in your system, the system that you work with, like to show when these things. I mean, you're going to see these planetary combinations in the chart, and they're going to have most of the time cropped up by the age of 35.
Mhm.
But I also mean, like, health problems happen. The rest of, they happen even more and more after the age 35. So what kind of timing techniques are you using? Are you using transits? Are you using like regressions? Like how are you seeing these combinations get activated?
That's a great question. And I will say that that hasn't been that hasn't really been the main part of my research and writing. So I could tell you very easily, okay, look at the transits, because the
Mhm.
transits are going to say XYZ, these transits are going to correspond with this thing or whatever. But I can say that because I have, I guess, a theoretical understanding of that's what to do, and I have an anecdotal understanding of when clients have this issue start within their lives, you look at the transits and you see XYZ corresponding with that, or something to that effect. However, the predictive side of medical astrology is my next big venture. I mean, I know that the natal book is the next big venture, but the predictive side of medical astrology is also one of the next big ventures because everything that I do as a medical astrologer, I do it based on my own research. So
Mhm.
I love Judith. She's a great supporter of my work, and I love her as a person because I think that Judith stands very singularly amongst astrologers as being a person who has the ability to demonstrate what she can do on the spot, because that's also something that I do on the spot, and I love Judith because she can do that. I can do that. I know probably two other people who I'm aware of who have that ability or whatever. And so there's that, but I've never really read any of Judith's books. And the reason for that is because I don't want for anybody to ever say that Mychal Bryan's work is based on my work.
Mm.
So I've never in writing my book, I didn't consult Judith's books, I didn't consult Diane Kramer's books, I didn't consult anybody's books because I want for my work and for my legacy to be based on my own client practice, my own direct research, my own direct contact with living human beings basically. And so, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because my main goal in writing this last book was to show how to use the natal chart as a diagnostic tool.
Uh-huh. Okay.
I've proven that 100 times over that the natal chart can be used as a diagnostic tool, and that book stands singularly as a book in that regard that does that. Other people's and I don't mean to talk about other people, but other people's medical astrology books say, it's Moon in Taurus, blah, 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 or Sun in Gemini, blah, blah, blah. My book shows real people with their real birth charts, with their real birth information and their real stories and how these issues show up in their life. The next book, after the natal book, the next book that I'm going to write is going to be about prediction.
Mhm.
And so what I've been doing over the years is I've gathered all of these dates. When did your disease start? When was your disease really bad? When did your disease clarify itself? When did you get better? I've been gathering these dates from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clients. We have a questionnaire on our website where people drop their information every single day. We have thousands of entries for that. So when I do sit down to write the predictive book on medical astrology, we have a pool of information to draw from. As of this moment, I haven't really seriously engaged in that work to be able to say to you, use secondary progressions to predict when you're going to get sick, because that hasn't been the purpose of my writing for the last 2 years. And when I have a better answer, I'll let you know.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate that you are, you're not just talking about techniques that you haven't used yourself. You're validating them yourself before you write about them. So yeah, that's good.
Okay, one thing I will say is that from a predictive perspective, my go-to outside of medical astrology is the solar return chart, eclipses, transits. Those are the things that I go to most of the times in predictive astrology for everything else other than medical astrology. And I think the reason why I've stood so harshly, I don't even think harshly, but the reason why I haven't really approached medical prediction is because I'm uncertain as to whether or not medical prediction is within the scope of my practice. And so, because what are we talking about when we say medical prediction? What we're talking about is we're predicting in the future when somebody's going to get sick, which is a
Or better.
sick or better for sure. Sick or better, but both of those things are a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You tell somebody that you're going to get better in 3 months and they die. And they go to their family and they say to their family, my astrologer told me I'm going to get better in 3 months, regardless of what happens. I need to stop chemotherapy now. And they drop down dead 3 months from now.
Yeah.
Or they stay on the chemotherapy and you tell them they're going to get better in 3 months and they should plan their next vacation, do all this other stuff, buy that new house, and they die because of the chemotherapy. So the point is, both of those things, telling somebody when they're going to get sick is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Telling someone when they're going to get better is a lawsuit waiting to happen. And I am so concerned about the well-being of the people that I teach and the people who I teach not making themselves look stupid in public that,
Yeah.
that I really haven't touched predicting either forward or backward. I would rather you come to me with your birth chart and I give you my spiel that I give to every client.
Mhm.
Anything that I'm saying to you has already happened by the time as you're 35, and then give you your reading. But I don't really I've never felt the internal impetus to go beyond that, because that work that I do is plenty of magic to last somebody their entire lifetime. I don't also need to say to you, and in 5 years, you're going to lose half of your stomach, because that just isn't what I want to do with my time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I just have one last quick question about the title of your book, The New Western Medical Astrology. Are you calling it The New Western Medical Astrology based on what you're speaking to of using your own experiences and your own research and not relying on other folks' books?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And when I named it that, when I there are few people in the medical astrology community whose opinions really matter to me. And I think Judith is one of those people. There are only two, really, Judith Hill and Nicholas Smuts-Alsop. And the reason for that is because in the West, Judith Hill and Nicholas Smuts-Alsop are the only two Western tropical astrologers who can prove their medical astrology abilities with their eyes closed. And I think that I'm the third person on that list. Me, Judith, Nicola. In terms of the level of what we can do, the three of us, we stand apart. And so I was apprehensive about Judith reading the book because of the name of the book, and I was apprehensive of Nicola reading the book because of the name of the book, because
Oh.
it is a bit, it's like the new Western medical astrology, so that it's assuming that there's an old Western medical
Yeah.
astrology. And truthfully, there is an old Western medical astrology. It's the medical astrology where you tell somebody that if they have their sun in Taurus, they should wear a scarf around their neck because their throat is more susceptible to blah, blah, blah. Or when you tell somebody that if you're an Aries, you should watch out for your head because you're likely to
Right.
bang your head into things. Or you tell somebody if they're, I don't know, if they're Gemini, you need to watch out for your arms and fingers. There's a version of medical astrology that people practice that is really just that. You're a Cancer, you need to mind what you eat. You're a Sagittarius, watch out for your hips and thighs. This idea of identifying someone with the sign of the zodiac is the old Western medical astrology.
I see.
I don't do that. I've never done that in my life. I speak about the world as a combination of planetary influences. And when I look at the chart, I don't see the sign that your sun is in, or the sign that your ascendant is in, or the sign of anything. I see the combinations within your chart the planetary combinations within your chart that directly points towards an issue. And so that's why I name it the New Western Medical Astrology, because my book takes the leap of no longer talking about you as if you're an Aries or a Taurus or this thing or that thing or whatever, but I go the direction of talking about you as a combination of stellar influences and showing how those combinations make you who you are physically, mentally, emotionally, sociologically, how they make you who you are in every sphere of your life.
Love it. Bold move, but very accurate. Well done.
I guess also the second part of the title, Pathways Towards the Cosmos Indwelling. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's an extension. Sometimes I just name things because I think it sounds good. So pathways towards the cosmos and dwelling. I think so whenever I write a book, I give the name to my students first. I'm so fortunate and so blessed to have been able to create a community of astrologers who understand the astrology that I practice because for me, there's nothing like that's the biggest blessing in my life to have been able to make a community so large where I can speak the way I speak and people just get it. And so whenever I write a book, I always pass a list of potential names around to my students first, and then they say, this is the one. And so I passed that name around. I just sent it out to our group chat, and everybody was like, wow, this is it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so there's that. But that idea of the cosmos and dwelling is also meant to point people in the direction that, hey, I'm not just a Virgo, or I'm not just a Leo, or I'm not just a Taurus, or I'm not just a Pisces, or I'm not just a Scorpio, or I'm not just a sign. Because I think in the 21st century, we're still so caught up on this idea that this thing happened to you because you're a Gemini, or this thing happened to you because you're a Capricorn, or we're so caught up in that language of speaking single factors that I wanted for the title of the book to point towards there is something within me that's so much greater than this one part about my chart. And within myself, I can actually hold an entire universe. And my chart holds an entire universe. Therefore, this book is an entry point to the cosmos within myself. I think that's why I named it that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, and we call ourselves a Gemini or a Cancer just because our sun is in that sign, and that's like not
Limiting.
well, it's like why not Cancer rising or Gemini rising? Like you're not a Gemini, you're not a Cancer. But I also like that too, the cosmos indwelling, because it really calls to my mind the zodiac man, the cosmic, the Kala Purusha that is also inside. So it's that macrocosm, microcosm thing, and that's such a basis for medical astrology. We didn't even really get into that. I feel like we were having more of a meta level conversation instead of actually getting into some of the techniques. But that's such an important part of medical astrology is that the zodiac man inside the body, and what as you were saying with the moon, with Venus in Cancer squared by the Saturn. The reason is because your stomach is ruled by Cancer because it's that part of the zodiacal man. For those who aren't aware, which at the end of this conversation, if you probably aren't going to be listening anyway. You don't know that. So
where do you want folks to buy the book who are going to get it?
Yeah, so at the moment, I want folks to buy the book on Amazon, which, I don't know if it's a love-hate relationship with Amazon, but it's definitely a beast that I think.
We know more. We know. We know. Yeah.
Yeah. I want folks to buy it on Amazon, and that's just what it's gonna have to be. And I recently told myself that's just where it is, Mychal, get over it. So
Yeah.
I want people to buy the book on Amazon. And if you see me in public, I'll sign it for you. But Amazon is definitely where you can buy a copy of the new Western Medical Astrology.
And what about any upcoming classes or if folks want to book a reading?
Okay, so I'm not gonna overly talk about the booking the readings because I'm enjoying
You're
my
already just like
I'm,
packed
I'm
up.
enjoying
Okay.
my vacation. And then last night, someone said to me, the lady who I had last night, and it broke my heart because once again, I'm a very Saturnian person. I belong to the people. And she was like, Mychal, this is so great. I'm booking this reading with you because you're such a hard person to book a reading with. And it just tore me up inside because I was like, oh my God, people want to work with me and they can't. But
Mm,
I actually am enjoying my alone time. So
that's fair.
classes, if anybody wants to take class with me, I'm actually teaching a solar return class this weekend, July 19th. So that's a fun predictive astrology class that people can come and take at Oraculos. And our actual new semester for people who want to join our professional astrologers diploma program starts in September. And when you join that program, you have two general semesters with me. And then after that, out into the people who are purely on the medical track and the people who are on the general track. So the the general track incorporates talking about all of the other non-medical stuff. Your finances, your family, your children, your employees, your all the other stuff. But the medical track specifically is the green book, basically, specifically goes into medical astrology, all of the nuances of that, from basic medical astrology to advanced medical astrology counseling to working with clients even while they're going through treatment, the whole nine yards. So that program starts in September of 2025. And then in October, we're going to have our second annual medical astrology intensive in person. The last one was last year in Boston because I live in Boston. And this one is going to be again in Boston. And I'm really excited about it because it's one thing to see people on Zoom, but it's another thing to see people in person. And I was really happy to do that last year. So we're going to have our second annual medical astrology intensive in Boston, which is going to be even better than the first one because now we have a book. So those are the main things coming up. And if you want to find out more information, you can check out our website at oraculosastrology.com.
Okay, well, wonderful, Mychal. Thanks for being on the show again.
You're awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so
Congratulations.
much.
Yeah.
Cheers.